thank you so much, firstly, for agreeing to be a guest on Gene East's A Grade podcast. I massively appreciate it, and I've been really looking forward to the conversation since we had it booked in. So thank you so much for taking the time.
No worries, James. It's great to be here. Yeah, really pleased to be speaking to you today.
It's the podcast series is speaking to sales and marketing leaders about their career and about how they've got into the position that they're in and their journey and the challenges and the mindset about being successful. And I think it's a great time for us to be speaking now, given the fundamental changes we've seen in the fraud market this year with new technology and so it's just a great time for us to be speaking. As I said, just massively appreciate you taking the time and with that in mind, getting straight into it, doing the prep for the podcast. I saw in 2000, starting out in 2004, and then moving into fraud with threat metrics as a product marketeer in 2016. But prior to that, I saw you read English at Exeter and then did a master's in film history, which is super cool. As someone who absolutely loves films, that's super cool. And then followed a diploma in marketing. So I suppose, one question to start out was it always your intention to go into marketing, or was that something that you developed when you were, studying English? Like, how did that come about?
Yeah, well, funnily enough, I'm having a lot of these conversations with my eldest son at the moment. He's 16 and just starting to go into thinking about A levels and uni and what he wants to do. Interestingly, my very first careers advice session in my very Catholic school when I was about 13, I went through the typical series of questions, and at the end, out popped advertising and marketing as my career option that would suit me really well. So I
Amazing.
always kind of had it at the back of my mind. I liked the concept of communicating and communicating things in a kind of clear and interesting way. I had a huge passion for English at school. I just loved my English lessons. I loved reading. I loved thinking about words and communication. And so, not knowing what I wanted to do at university, English became my natural choice because my parents said, just follow your passions. And that was where I met a brilliant tutor who taught history of film. And he was like, hey, you're really good at this. Go and do a master's in film. And I was like, okay, I'm going to keep following my passions. And I went to do a master's in history of film, and it was so fascinating. I did an internship at the British Film Institute. I also met a couple of my British director idols. So I'd written my thesis on a guy called Terence Davies. I met him, I interviewed him. I then did my master's thesis on a guy called Don Boyd. I met him, and then he offered me an internship after my master's. So I went and worked as a researcher for him for a while, and I loved it. I was, really lucky to do that. But what I quite quickly realized was, working as a researcher in TV and film at the time was quite a sort of lonely job. I was working on my own quite a lot, and I was like, hey, this is not me. Like, I need to be around people. I need to be doing more. I need to be in a team. And that was kind of what led me into marketing. So I had a few friends who worked for big advertising agencies in London. And I was like, hey, who's your recruiter? Like, can I get an intro? And then the rest was kind of history. So I got a route into a recruiter who recruited for the big London advertising agencies. I interviewed with a couple, and I landed a graduate position at M&C Saatchi in London, working in their direct marketing arm. And that was my kind of very first proper job, if you like. And it was funny that moment because I did think back to that early careers advice of, hey, advertising and marketing. And I was like, wow, I'm here. Like, it's kind of come full circle. So I guess what I would say I learned from that is 100% follow your passions. Like, you have to do something that you enjoy. But also, as you go through that process, you may well find out that your natural passions don't lead to a job which you really love. And so I realized that I needed to be doing something in a bigger team. And then that kind of came full circle to advertising and marketing. And yeah, it was a crazy first job, and I learned an incredible amount. working my 70 or 80-hour weeks in London at MC Saatchi.
That's amazing. That's an amazing, yeah. Thinking back to your tutor that you met, it's kind of, we all seem to have these moments in our life and they're fundamental, and it can be sometimes a bit scary to look back and think some of them are by chance, really.
Yeah.
They come around, but they have such a massive impact on what's to come. And of course, as well, it's taking the opportunities when they come around. It's recognizing them and taking them as well, right? You've got to be in the mindset to do that. But yeah, that's an amazing start. And I always say that sales and marketing is like some of the most creative parts of business. I think
Mm.
sometimes, maybe certainly on the marketing side, but sometimes maybe people think sales is not that creative, but it's super creative. And I firmly believe if you have a creative bone in your body, you need to be able to express that, right? It needs to come out because it can't be bottlenecked, So yeah, it's a creative game we're playing, right?
It really is, yeah. And I would say, I mean, both my husband and my boss would say I am terrible at design. Like, I am not a good designer. I'm not creatively minded when it comes to design, but where my creativity, I think, does come through is in language and in writing. So I have always loved thinking about how you express concepts, how you use words to express concepts, and how you use communication in a creative way to connect with people and to get your thoughts across. And I actually think when it comes to sales and marketing, that is a really, really key kind of creative outlet. Like, how do you connect with someone in a creative way that they haven't had that previous connection before? And so while I would be very, very open about my poor, terrible design and visual creative skills, I think I do have a way of being able to connect to people through language and through a creative use of language. And that's really very much been my creative outlet.
that's super interesting. Yeah, I think like you, I when I think about the copy we send to customers or the outreach and prospects and how we meet them, a lot of it is via email, right? And it's always a game for me to think how many words can I take out of this? How can I amplify the meaning but with less? And
Mm.
I agree. There's a depth there. Yeah, that's super interesting. I could talk to you about that all day actually. But the um, the move into fraud, was it one of them ones that happened by accident, or how did that move come about?
It was completely accidental. So, as I kind of alluded to earlier, life in agencies back in the 2000s was absolutely crazy. It was 5 days in the office. It was just after the dot-com boom, and so we were doing a lot of web and digital work. I never left the office before 9 or 10 at night. We got takeaways, we partied really hard, we sometimes slept under our desks. It was generally a kind of 70 or 80-hour week. And it was amazing in my 20s. I loved it. But then I got married and had my first child. And uh, sort of broached the subject of going back to work, and the options at the time were going back 4 days a week in London. And with my commute, I realised that that would mean not ever seeing my child for those 4 days, and it just felt like too much to give up at that time. And so I decided not to go back to that role, and I ended up setting up my own kind of small marketing consultancy, doing some marketing work, doing some copywriting, and I had various customers. And at the time, my husband worked in a fraud prevention company, and the marketing team there were looking for a copywriter to help with some marketing work. And so he referred me to the marketing team. I ended up getting a job with them, and fairly quickly was then asked if I would come on full time and work full time for the product marketing team. And it wasn't something that I was looking for at the time. I had two young boys, but I just thought, hey, this feels like an opportunity. I really enjoy the market. I really enjoy thinking about fraud prevention, and so I decided to just kind of bite the bullet and do it. And it felt like a bit of a crazy decision at the time because my boss was in California. I was like, I don't know how I'm going to manage this, but let's go for it and see how it goes. So it was very much by accident, but I very quickly loved the kind of social kind of doing good aspect of fraud prevention. And I think,
Yeah.
one of the things that has always motivated me in work is feeling like you're doing something that is benefiting society. I didn't just want to get up and do a role that I felt had no kind of social benefit to it. And I really enjoyed that kind of feeling that what I was doing was, making a difference and contributing in some small way. And so um, it was a big jump because I had never worked in fraud prevention before. And then suddenly starting to work in a product marketing team where you're essentially marketing the product, it was a huge leap. And I had a baptism of fire of learning. Um, but I think another, you know, recommendation to anyone starting out is, if you have got that spirit of being inquisitive and wanting to learn, you can turn your hand to anything. You just have to be committed to learning a new discipline. And I did. I read so much. I listened to stuff. Um, I spent a lot of time asking people what I thought were really basic questions, but I just kept on trying to learn and trying to learn. And anything that I didn't understand, I was like, right, I need to figure this out. How am I going to work out what this means, how this works? And I just spent a lot of time kind of constantly asking people. And as a result, I think I had a huge imposter syndrome for a long time because I was like, I'm in this role that I don't feel qualified to do, but I need to do it really, really well. Um, and I think part of that is my personality. I think I've tended towards like spirits of perfectionism at times. And so I naturally tend to have a kind of strong imposter syndrome with anything that I don't feel like I can do brilliantly. But I think a little bit of imposter syndrome is can be useful at times to harness to go, okay, how do I get out of this and how do I make myself confident in what I'm doing?
Absolutely. It's so interesting. You mentioned there about just initially about the move into fraud being by accident, and but once you're in it, it's very similar to me and Gene East and Finn and everyone else at the business. Fraud is a market that we started to work in, but quickly sort of loved it, fell in love with it, and because it's mission driven, we feel like we're adding value. It's a recruitment business. We help our customers hire professionals, but we're also in some small way adding, trying to combat, fraud and financial crime, right? So these things really, really matter. It's exactly the same for us. And going back to the point that you made about, moving from a copywriter into a product marketeer and having imposter syndrome and realizing that there was loads to learn. And I think that is super interesting, Rebecca, because I think a lot of people I see starting out say they want to learn and want to improve. And you probably look back on that time now and you kind of only remember the good bits.
Mm.
But there would have been times there that it was really, really difficult. It wouldn't have been straightforward. Like you've still got to deliver against the role. Like regardless of your current level of knowledge, you've still got to deliver, and that's the
Mm.
expectation. That's how it is. And so at the time, it would have been, looking back at it, I'm sure it's, a fond memories. But at the time, it would have been really, really difficult. And I think people making that decision that you are going to do it, come what may, I am going to do this, I think
Mm.
is really, really powerful. I think until people make that decision that whatever obstacles they're going to run into, they're going to get through, it can be really, really difficult. You can start to falter unless you're fully committed.
Yeah, 100%. And I think one of the most underrated skills, I would say generally, well, I think there's two things that I always really value in any person that I interview or anyone that I work with. And those two things are resilience and kindness. And actually, on the surface of that, they are quite opposing things, like resilience and kindness. But I think being a resilient person and kind of picking yourself up from the knockbacks and kind of continually saying, I am going to keep doing this and I am going to keep doing this and I am going to stick with it is such an underrated quality. It's so important, both in the environment in which we live at the moment, which is kind of very frenetic and constantly changing, but also in your kind of day to day life. But I think hand in hand with that, if you can be a kind person and you approach everything you do with kindness, then it kind of allows the people that you work with to kind of help pick you up and help support you in that resilience battle. So I think those two things, yeah, have always been really, really important to me.
Absolutely. Leading with empathy, understanding that we're all just, we all have imposter syndrome and we're all, and imposter syndrome is you're absolutely right. And being vulnerable to know that we don't know it all and that we can learn every day and that's a blessing. It's an opportunity to learn every day and improve is a super helpful traits in people. So I couldn't agree with you more. And yeah, just on that, the move into product marketing, like, had you done product marketing before? Like, had you done it? So,
No,
so I
I
find
hadn't.
that's amazing to me. Like, it's such a, yeah, I would, it takes guts, right? It takes guts to do that. I'm just going to go and do it. It takes guts.
Yeah, and I think product marketing is actually a really, really hard role. It's a really difficult role to do well, and it's a really hard role to hire for because um, it's such a meld of product strategy and product knowledge
Yeah,
with the skill to be able to market something. And so typically people who apply for product marketing roles are either product strategists or they're marketers, but it's quite rare that you find the two kind of meeting. And
yeah,
so generally you either have a really good marketer who you can teach the product strategy and product knowledge to, or you have a very, very good communicating product strategist who you can kind of teach the marketing to. And I was obviously more of a marketer, but I think I have probably quite an analytical mind. And so I'm always trying to understand how something works and how I can communicate that. So one of the things actually that M&C Saatchi taught me was the kind of economy of words and the economy of being able to explain something simply. So Maurice Saatchi was very famous for his, turning the complex into simple is the hardest thing that you can do as a communicator. And I was challenged to do that all throughout my studies and my career. I famously had an English teacher who told me that I was using 50 words when three would do. And she said to me, imagine you're paying for every word that you use in this paragraph. Would you still say it the same way? And it was a really, really good learning experience to say, how do I communicate this in the most simple language without all of the fluff? And I think sometimes people think they're being cleverer by using bigger words and bigger language. But actually, the cleverest possible thing you can do is take a really complex problem or a really complex idea or a really complex product capability and explain it in a really simple and easy to understand way. And that was the thing that really captured my imagination with product marketing because I learned the product of threat metrics and I was like, wow, this is really cool. This is really interesting, but it's really complicated. And actually, if I'm trying to explain it to a business user, they don't have the time that I've got to go and sit and, think about it for 3 hours. They need to understand it in 2 or 3 minutes to see whether it's going to solve their problem. And so that kind of simplicity of communication really appealed to me about product marketing. And I kind of thought, actually, I can do this. This is what I'm good at. And I think if I can explain it to someone, then that is a skill. Because I'm not a particularly technical person. I have become more technical throughout my career, But if I can explain it to someone and I can learn it, then yeah, then I'm doing a good job. So I very quickly fell in love with product marketing for that reason. But I think you have to be a particular type of person to love it, because it is that real blend between kind of product strategy and communication.
Yeah, yeah, that's super interesting, Rebecca. Honestly, I'm going to butcher this quote, right? But you would have, it's easy to make things complex, but it's so much harder to make them simple. And I think we always look for simplicity. And you're right. I think sometimes people think they're being clever when they're, or trying to present themselves in a different way. But just being, talking in natural language and getting to the point, and ease of communication. That's amazing. Like, you think about like starting out in Saatchi, like such a famous, like such a famous, brand to be working with straight out of uni. Right? It's just super interesting, right? And on that point, Threat Metrics, like joining Threat Metrics, prior to the acquisition, what was that like? What was that like at that time? Like, what was?
I mean, it was crazy for me because I had taken time out to have children. I had been doing my own marketing consultancy, kind of in my spare time around kind of school pickups and things, but I'd been quite at home. And suddenly I was, in meetings in San Jose, looking out across Silicon Valley with some incredible minds in tech. And yeah, talk about imposter syndrome. I mean, that was my absolute huge imposter syndrome. I was like, what am I doing here? Like, I'm so not qualified for this. And I had an amazing boss, Vanita Pandey, who, lots of people know and love. And she relentlessly pushed me to do more and be bigger and be better. She was such a cheerleader for me in those early days, through my kind of lack of confidence and my kind of coming back to, a very new job and a very different job. It was really exciting to work for Threat Metrics in those days. We were growing, we were the leader in the market, we had some incredible momentum. Our product marketing team worked into Alistair Faulkner, who's now my boss at Darwinium. Who It was the first time I kind of met him, and I was so inspired by his vision and his entrepreneurial spirit, and the way that he thought about product strategy was just so interesting. So it was, yeah, all I can say is it was really exciting. It was just such an amazing time to be new to tech, be working for a Silicon Valley startup, I suppose we were at that stage, or scale up. And just sort of on the cusp of starting to think about acquisition. So I started at ThreatMetrics 2 years prior to our acquisition by LexisNexis Risk Solutions. So I went through that whole kind of journey as well, which was just, yeah, I mean, I learned loads, and it was super interesting.
Um, Vanita and Alistair are two of the finest. They're proper operators, both of them. Incredible, incredible professionals, right? So it's a blessing to have met those. Going in there, and it's interesting as well. Being there 2 years prior to the NNRS acquisition. I imagine because you were there for years afterwards, the business was acquired and you stayed at NRS in the new company for many years after. Was it a massive change? Did it feel completely different, or did they leave you alone for a little bit before maybe becoming more part of the NRS group, or how did that feel?
Yeah, I mean, it was a huge change because we went from being, a sort of scale up company to suddenly being part of one of the biggest technology companies in the world. And it was also the first time in my career that I'd ever worked for a company that large, because even at M&C Saatchi and some of the other agencies I worked for, they were much more self-contained and just smaller. And so the business processes were a kind of new thing to me, but I did actually really relish it in the early days, because it was such a good learning curve to understand what happens when a company is acquired and how it assimilates into the business. And so I really enjoyed that kind of early stage of seeing how they were going to take the product of threat metrics and kind of integrate it into their larger product suite. I think the other thing I really enjoyed was the exposure to the wider Relics group. And so at the time, I was managing our case study program and also writing our cybercrime report, which became kind of quite flagship things within the wider Relics group. And so I was lucky enough to kind of have exposure to being able to present that case study program to some of the other Relics companies. And again, that gave me really great exposure into kind of some of the sideways companies within the group. And just really brilliant networking opportunities of being able to meet other comms leaders who are doing slightly different things, but kind of under that umbrella of Relics. And so I did, really enjoy that period. I moved across to the market planning team. We did a lot of kind of industry strategy and kind of thinking about how threat metrics was becoming part of the wider product portfolio, which was really interesting. But I think my heart has always been in startups. And I love the fast pace and the excitement of working in a startup. Back to those MC Saatchi days of kind of 80-hour weeks. I just loved being a part of something where if I wasn't there, things broke.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to be part of something new and building something again. And so when Alistair called me a few months after starting Darwinium and said, "Hey, I'm doing this new thing," I was like, "I'm there," like I was so excited. And very humbled that I was asked to join Darwinium. I felt super lucky to be in that position. And yeah, Darwinium has been the ride of my life career wise. It's been incredible.
Yeah, I think I appreciate being humble with it, but I think Alistair has assembled a fantastic team, and that's testament to everyone over there, right? I think it's he's a top guy, but been able to for him to hire people like yourself to join the business and bring in all the IP and everything your experience is just absolutely. That's one of the reasons why the business is successful, right? It's fundamental. So yeah, was it again? Going back into a startup. I know you'd experienced it before, but again, it must have been such a massive change. Again, I know you've got experience of it, but then going from LNRS Relics into it must be a big change again.
Yeah, and also I'd never done anything this small. So I was employee number 8 at Darwinium. So I had never been that early. And, my first day was Alistair saying, "Rebecca, we need a website." And I'm like, "Oh, okay." Like, there was nothing set up from a kind of go-to-market perspective. So it was everything. It was, our product, our positioning, our brand identity, our website, our CRM system, right from the ground up. So I'd never done anything this early. And yeah, I mean, it's been a huge learning curve and an absolutely crazy roller coaster ride of the most incredible highs and also, really challenging lows, which comes with any startup. But the learning opportunities have just been insane. So when it comes to kind of leadership and management, starting a function from scratch, starting messaging structures from scratch, starting kind of positioning from scratch has just been, incredible to learn. And I think what it's really taught me actually, because I think I have throughout my career, leaning on the kind of slight perfectionism traits, often found sort of feedback hard to, negative feedback hard to accept or hard to kind of work through. And I have tended to sort of strive to do something till it's absolutely perfect. And in a startup, you 100% can't do that. Like you have to move fast and break things is one of Alistair's, favorite phrases. And he has constantly said to me, "Rebecca, perfection is the enemy of progress." And it so is in the concept of a startup. You cannot do things to the point of perfection because you just would never make any progress at all. And so I have had to learn. to know what to do to 90% and what to do to 70% and what to do to 50%, which has been a massive learning curve for me. But also um, feedback and criticism and, you know, hearing what people say about either the way that we're positioning Darwinium or about the product is absolutely critical to your growth. And if you can't take that and you can't absorb that and be positive and use that feedback to change and grow, again, I just don't think that you can make the kind of progress that you need to make in a startup. And it's definitely still a work in progress for me because, you know, learning when to pivot and when to stay on your line is a challenge. You know, like is this feedback enough to make me pivot to doing something totally different, or do I need to hold my line on this and just kind of tweak and change things a little bit? But I think that that has been a huge learning curve for me to be very sponge-like to everything that is given to me in terms of feedback, and to use it and really think about it and think about whether I need to kind of change, pivot, be less of a perfectionist, be more of a perfectionist, you know, all of those kind of decisions that you have to make daily. Um, but I hope that I'm still a work in progress on that, you know.
Yeah, I think taking feedback, when I was younger, it was so difficult for me. I was sort of resistant to it. I wasn't. I think when I learnt that to be vulnerable, to know that you're not the finished article, and be okay with that, that's when my career really took off. I was able just to accept the feedback, and people weren't trying to hurt me; they were trying to help me, and everything else. But I was smiling when you said about being a perfectionist in a startup, like it's kind of minimum viable product most of the time, and it must
Yeah,
be so jarring for a perfectionist to like,
yeah,
oh God, I could do
yeah.
so much more here, but like obviously there's loads of fires burning over here. We can't stay. We got to crack on. I can imagine that being a challenge, right? So it's interesting to hear you develop that, and thinking about the start that you've had, and up to now, and talking about some of the mentors in your life. One of the things that I see often is the start that people have, their first experience of work, and that can be the first experience of working, like starting out after school, university, whatever. But it can also be their first experience of a new job, like the first months when they start a new job, kind of fundamental to their long-term success. And you've obviously you have to make your own success. You have to realize the opportunity and embrace it and take it on. But would you agree that like getting a good start, getting into a good business with good mentors, and listening to them is fundamental? Would you agree with that?
Yeah, 100%. And I would say, looking back to my first role at M&C, my CEO there was an incredible female leader, and she was such an inspiration. And she really took kind of raw talent and nurtured it, and very much gave you the impetus and the opportunity to succeed. And so she sponsored my diploma in direct and interactive marketing when I was working there. She was like, it's really important for you to learn your craft, Rebecca, and I'm 100% going to sponsor you to do this while you're working. She was incredible, and just having a female leader at that level was
Yeah.
just so important to me at the time. Actually, to the point where I would say I didn't see or experience any kind of sexism in my first kind of early roles at all. And it was quite a shock coming into tech. Not that I experienced direct sexism in tech at all, but it was so male dominated
Yeah. Yeah.
and can be quite intimidating at times, actually, because I was in such a minority as a woman in tech, that I would be in meetings with 12 or 13 men and one or two women. And so I think having that strong grounding of strong, visible, successful female leadership was really important to me. And I really seek out those leaders now. So I seek them out, and I ask for mentorship, not just women, but also men, that I feel um, I've either connected with through my career. So one of my mentors is a previous CMO, and he is brilliant, and I really, really value his guidance and mentorship. But I do actively seek out mentors now, kind of official and unofficial, and ask people to, give me advice and comment and support, and really kind of take that feedback on board. But I think that early community that you build of people that you admire, I would give anyone the recommendation to really nurture that community.
Yeah.
I think I didn't do it enough in my early career, probably because I didn't have the confidence to kind of continually approach people and say, I need your help, or, because I saw that as a sign of weakness, or, that I wasn't doing well enough. But I think having that confidence to approach that kind of network of mentors early on in your career and really build that community would be probably my number one piece of advice. Because, you know, now more than ever, people don't stay in one job for 20 years. They tend to go through, three or four different roles for 2 or 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
And always having that community and that network is such a huge support as you go through those different roles.
Yeah. I think, yeah, to me, when I think about my career, right the way through school and till now, there's people in my life that just have had such a massive impact. Some of them I don't even know if they know, but yeah, having that crew around you that will always pick up the phone, that gives you sound advice, is absolutely everything. And I feel so fortunate to have had that. And yeah, it's something that we speak to young salespeople, young marketeers all the time across the go-to-market function, and they ask me, what would, for advice, and I say to them, when you're starting out, is to go somewhere where you're going to learn and earn. Surround yourself with good people, listen to them. It's fundamental. I see, unfortunately, there's so many examples, unfortunately, where people, they just join the wrong business, or they join a good business at the wrong time, and their experience is really, really badly tainted about, what this game is, and that's that's a massive, human cost. There's problems with that. So, yeah, I think getting off to a good start is absolutely everything. But that mentor question, I wanted to ask you. You mentioned about like actively seeking it out, like that's come up before, in different podcasts, people going out and cultivating that. It must have felt quite daunting the first time that you were doing that, right? Even for someone like, as successful as you are, like the positions that you've been in and are in now, like it still must be a bit daunting to go out and actually ask that, right? You just got to, the advice is just to get on with it,
Yeah, and I would say find the communities where you feel comfortable. So a lot of the time it's happened for me at kind of community events. So Merchant Risk Council is absolutely brilliant at their kind of community cultivation and their mentor program. And actually, I'm now mentoring a couple of people that I've met through that community, which I learn as much from mentoring people as I learn from other people mentoring me. By the way, I would say it's definitely a full circle of, you know, getting as much out of both sides of the relationship. But I would say, find your communities and find people within those communities. So when I started in tech, having had that experience of brilliant female leadership, I actually really struggled with the whole women in tech thing, because I was like, why do we need a women in tech forum? We don't have men in tech forums. And I found it really, I was really frustrated by it, because I felt like a lot of the time the women in tech meetups were on the kind of side stage or down the corridor, or, like, and I was like, I want to be on the main stage with the men. I
Oh,
don't want you to be siphoning me off, into a
absolutely.
side corridor. And I resolutely refused to do any of those panels. So I was asked a couple of times when I was at LexisNexis, oh, will you sit on this panel of women in tech? I was like, no, I'll sit on a panel with men, thank you. Like, I just did not want to do it. And it was actually the MRC that kind of made me come full circle on that. They asked me to sit on a panel in their virtual Women in Payments and Fraud summit. And it was something that it was on a topic that really resonated with me. It was about taking a career break as a mum and then coming back. And I was like, actually, this does resonate with me. I'm going to give it a go. And it was so humbling because what it showed me was, it's not just about what I think, but it's also about being present and being the voice and representing. And actually, if you're not there being part of the conversation, you can't expect to change it. And so it challenged me to say, be part of the conversation to make that change happen. And also, it's about the people that are coming up through the industry for whom that is still a big issue and who may not have the confidence to say, put me on the stage with the man. And so I realized I actually had quite a kind of point of reflection on it. And I thought, Reki, you're being really like quite pig-headed and quite selfish about this. Like it isn't just about, your own experiences. It's also about kind of being there to represent for other people in the industry. And as a consequence, I've actually started doing a lot more of those sessions of, if I'm asked, saying yes to those sessions. And what it's shown me is this like army of amazing, incredible women
Yeah,
who all actually feel exactly the same, who have become my network and have become my mentors and mentees.
yeah,
And um, yeah, so I would say, like, wherever you find your community, and for me, it was in a very unexpected place, which I was very resistant to start off with. Wherever you find that community, harness that community and just ask for help. And I think if you go in through that channel, it suddenly becomes a lot more approachable than just kind of going up to a speaker on stage and say, hey, I loved your presentation, will you be my mentor, kind of thing. Um, so yeah, that's been my experience, and I'm finding it incredibly enriching part of my career, which I otherwise would have shut off. So yeah.
there's so much in that. Um, Sometimes it is the unexpected outcomes, or you know, deciding to say yes to something which ordinarily you wouldn't, and then the knowledge that you gain, and oh yeah, that's super interesting. And on the women in tech piece, I feel like I want to say something on it. I wish I had the answer. I hope it's improving. It needs to. We need technology teams to reflect society, right? It's so important.
Mm,
It's so
mm.
important. Diversity of thought, diversity of approach is absolutely critical. And you're right, technology is just so male dominated. It just is. I hope it's changing, but it's super important what you're doing. And I think, when you think about when you join Saatchi, the CEO there, a female, there'll be people looking at you and your colleagues, for that same reason. So super super important, and delighted that it's unexpected benefit.
Yeah, I wish it was not always in the kind of marketing and comms roles that you find all the women. I wish that we could find more women in product strategy and engineering, because to your point, when you're building products, if you're always
Yeah,
building them in coded mail, you're not building them for half the population. And in the same way as, when you're engineering models, you're encoding them all with a male bias. And
yeah,
I wish we could find more female engineers and female product leaders. I think, I'm trying to find ways to support it from the ground up. I've been asked to go into my son's school and do a talk on, fraud prevention as a career.
yeah,
And it's one of the things that I want to talk about is, don't be afraid of the STEM pathways, because I actually think if I had my education again, as much as I loved English, I would love to go back and study physics and engineering and computer science, because I almost felt like I wasn't qualified to study those subjects, and that if I went into those, it was very, very technical and not at all creative. And I actually think, physics and maths can be incredibly creative at the
Really?
high levels. And so I'm much more interested in them now, kind of later in my life than I was when I was a teenager. But it's one of the things that I'm really passionate about, is understanding how we can open up that environment to be more sort of female friendly.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You and both of us, and delighted that that's great to hear, because we need people, we need leaders to do that, right? So, super important topic, and I appreciate very much you raising it. And thinking about leadership, going from an IC into leadership, it's the same office, it's the same team, but it feels it's so different. How did you find that? How did you find that transition?
Yeah, it's a super hard transition, and I've had many existential doubts about how you prioritize whether you want to be an individual contributor or whether you want to be a leader. I actually think my most natural and loved role is the player manager role, which at a startup you naturally have to do,
Yeah,
because you don't have the luxury of going, I'm leading this team and I'm not executing. You know, I book meetings, write LinkedIn posts, and write copy in exactly the same way that I would ask any of my team to. We definitely don't separate tasks by that. But what I do love about leadership is trying to find and nurture, other people's talents, and watch them grow and flourish. And I think, I've had more and less success of that across my career. Sometimes I found it really hard. And I think sometimes it's very hard to put aside your way of doing things for learning someone else's way of doing things, and what motivates them and how they tick. Um, and that's a daily challenge, where I have to challenge myself to go, just because you would do it that way doesn't mean that's the right way, and doesn't mean that's the only way. So one of my greatest loves is looking back at people that I've managed in the past and watching their careers flourish. And, that has gone in many different directions for many different people. But I absolutely love the LinkedIn, connections of like, oh, I'm so happy that that person is running marketing at the Lost Gardens of Heligan, I think one of them is. And it's just so brilliant watching people's careers flourish that you've had a tiny kind of footprint on. So I love that sort of nurturing of other people's careers. But yeah, like I say, in a startup, it's probably the most challenging kind of management, because you have to be the player as well as the manager. And and sometimes that is also really hard, because sometimes there's things that I just need to go, I just need to get this done, and it's really important that I get it done, and I'm going to take it and do it. And it's not that learning experience for someone else, but other times you want to try and kind of make sure that you're giving the people that work in your team every possible opportunity to grow and flourish. And I do love that side of my role as well. I don't
yeah,
I don't think that I would be a very good manager who wasn't also contributing. Like, I just think I'm too want to get my hands into everything, as probably my team would tell you, oh, Rebekah, just go away, like leave me to it. But I love the practice of marketing, and I'm not sure that I would ever be a very good manager who couldn't continually get my hands dirty.
I know exactly what you mean. So I love recruiting. I still recruit. Still carry mandates from customers, and I think there's a real benefit to that, because when you're with the team, you're asking people to carry out tasks that you're carrying out. And I think sometimes we can forget the challenge of the day job, and it can be really powerful as well for the team members to see the leaders, doing the job as well. I think the problem with it, the challenge comes, it's just there's not enough hours in the day, and they
Yeah,
are at times very separate jobs, and they
yeah,
require a separation. So I think that player coach role is the best, but also the hardest job in leadership, in go to
100%.
market. Is you've got so many plates spinning,
Yeah.
and it's but extremely rewarding at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, I think that context switching is one of the hardest things, both about being player manager and also about working in a startup, right? Because my team is very small and we manage, 20 or 30 different things and different disciplines. So in any one day, my context switch between like 20 different things is insane. And I do sometimes get to the end of the day and think, oh my gosh, have I got like ADHD, or am I getting like early onset dementia, or like is it menopause? Like I can't work out which thing is making my brain go like quite how it's going. But yeah, I think it is that kind of crazy context switching is a real challenge to kind of keep up with. Um and yeah, there are never enough hours in the day. There are never enough hours in the day.
I think there's times where I step back and I'm like, oh, this is like we're busy, right? There's so much going on. There's so much happening, and like you said, you're kind of moving from different. It feels like different parts of your brain, different systems to think about different tasks and all the rest of it. And then, you kind of realize that this and at the time it can feel a lot, but you realize that this, careers are quite short, and actually it's such a blessing to be in this situation, and the pressure and responsibility is a privilege, but it's at the time it can feel a lot. And actually that leads me on to the next question. And it's more of a technical one with regards to marketing, because I'm not a marketeer, right? So I'm really learning loads on this podcast, obviously, but like super interested in this, right? And this might sound like a really silly question, so feel free to laugh at me if it does. But when you're marketing a fraud solution, for example, to customers of different sizes,
Mm.
does the messaging change? Like if you're going after a tier one bank, or a tier one enterprise customer, does the marketing change if you're going after an SMB? Is it completely different, or like how does that work? Like how do you work out what to say to different customers at different sizes?
Sometimes it changes because sometimes different size enterprises will have a different type of fraud challenge. And I think that's particularly the case in financial services, where the way you would market to a retail bank with brick and mortar stores is going to be very different to how you market to, a, a very new digital wallet that is just app only. But I think one of the challenges is finding the commonalities, because, you want to be able to find the thing that is a pain point across all financial institutions and be able to speak to that very, very clearly. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing I think is more to do with how different size enterprises buy software solutions and their kind of buying cycles and sort of general tolerance for risk. So I think as you go up the scale in larger enterprises, they're buying kind of portfolio and group of people who influence the buying decision is much bigger, with much more kind of complex web of interactions. And so a lot of the way that you would market to those organizations becomes more about understanding your buyer personas and how they interact with, your kind of key stakeholder. So, and I think that also then extends to, a business's tolerance for risk and the way that they are thinking about changing a fraud prevention solution, and what their kind of risk appetite is to either try something new or swap something out, and like the impact that that's going to have on business processes and on operational resilience and all of those kind of things that they're thinking about. So, yeah, I would say it's a very like complex and nuanced answer to that. I would say I'd look for the commonalities. I look for the kind of universal pain points across industries and across organizations of different sizes. But then I'm also very much thinking about speaking to, individual company problems and individual buyer personas to be able to kind of resonate with them. And actually, there's a really interesting kind of nuance to that question, which I think AI has made a lot easier in some ways, because you can take a base message and then evolve it in like multiple different ways for multiple different people. So, like if your base message is selling, say, scams to a financial services institution, the way that you would sell that scam prevention message to, say, your business user, your fraud analyst, your engineer, your CISO, it's going to be slightly different, the kind of points that you want to land on. But if you use AI in a really clever way to say, these are my buyer personas, this is my base message, these are all my kind of proof points. AI is brilliant then at tailoring your message to your buyer persona in a really cool way. And so those are some of the things that I'm starting to think about is how can I make messages more resonant and land in a more interesting way using the new tools at my disposal, which are changing daily. But yeah, it's that those are the sorts of things that keep me awake at night.
Well, a question for you about AI later, so I'll come back to that. It's obviously, this year, more so than any other year, we've really felt it, and our customers have felt it as well. It's this year it stopped being a kind of a topic for the future, and one that we're really feeling. So I'll come back to that in a second because it's super important. And here's another technical question for like I'm always interested in this for marketeers. Marketing function is obviously critical, and I think is going to grow in importance for all the reasons we've already spoken about. I think the marketing business unit within businesses is absolutely critical, and will only increase. The importance will only increase. Sometimes it can feel like to get the ROI, to understand where you're at in a campaign, it's intangible. It's difficult to know like this is the effect that it's having. Like how do you measure that, and also how do you like is it sometimes do you need resilience, or do you need confidence at times where it doesn't seem like it's having the effect that desired effect, or like how do you navigate that?
Yeah, it's probably the hardest thing about being a marketing leader, I would say, actually. One of my mentors said to me something to the effect of, only 15 to 20% of marketing works, and the other 80% doesn't show, direct results. And it can be terrifying sometimes, trying to manage a marketing budget, confidently, sensitively, carefully, frugally, when you sometimes feel like you can't show that sort of direct result. And I think it's more complicated now than ever
Yeah,
because the way that B2B businesses buy products and solutions is really complex, and they will go through, days, weeks, months, years sometimes of evaluating your product. And during that process, they may touch something that marketing has done 10, 12, 20 times in some cases. And so, one of the exercises that I've liked the most this year is taking some of our deals or opportunities and actually mapping out where the customer has touched a marketing initiated exercise.
yeah,
And it's a basic kind of attribution process, but sometimes it can be very hard to actually get your CRM system to map every touch in your attribution model, because sometimes it will be a conversation, it might be a networking event that is not part of your direct marketing outreach. And so, manually mapping not just the things that you're tracking in your CRM and you've got an attribution model too, but also those sort of softer things, those intangible things. Oh, I saw them at this, or they had a conversation with Alistair at that. And seeing the complexity of that buying journey, I think is a really useful way of reminding yourself that, even when you're LinkedIn ad or your event spend didn't directly show, you know, oh, from that event I got that customer. Even when you can't see that, you can actually map out this really kind of complex web of how someone has interacted with you and your product over time. And I'm also a really great believer that, people sell to people, right? It's about my connection and Darwinium's connection as people um, with buyers and with people who are evaluating your product. And there are times where you can't measure that efficacy, and so that is a challenge. And I would say, yeah, my summary is it's harder than it has ever been, but actually mapping out the nuances of how someone interacts across a whole buying cycle has been helpful to me to know where things are landing and what order things are happening in and the timings that things are happening in to help kind of plan for the future.
Yeah, that's great advice. Yeah, I can see how. Yeah, that's great advice. Thinking on that, given the complexity and the fact it's getting more complex, and thinking back as well to the messaging to different customers, like maybe specifically for someone thinking about joining a startup, how important do you think domain expertise in fraud, for example, is for you to be able to deliver at the level that you are for Darwinium? Like, and there's different theories on that. Some people will say, marketing is marketing, and you can apply the principles. But how is that kind of that domain expertise? How helpful is that?
It's a really good question, and I can't sit here and say it's you can't succeed without it because I didn't have the domain expertise when I joined ThreatMetrics. I knew nothing about fraud and I learned it from scratch. So I'm not going to sit here and say you can't succeed without the domain expertise. I What I do think is unequivocal is if you don't have domain expertise, you need to learn it pretty quick and you need to be absolutely 100% focused on getting up to speed from 0 to 100 very, very quickly. And that means reading everything, listening to everything, going to every competitor site and really understanding how things work. I think it's a big advantage to have domain level expertise, particularly if you're coming in at mid level or a leadership role. I think, you really need it now. I think it would be very hard to make that leap without it. Having said that, we've got some brilliant people in Darwinium who've come more from a payments background or more from a security background, and we have kind of taught them the fraud domain level expertise. I think what it's always come down to, and I think Alistair would 100% back this up, is that when we hire the person first. And so the person first is the most important thing. Do they have the right attributes to be a success in our company? And it's, in the early stages of startup, I do think you hire quite similar types of people,
Yeah.
because you have to be able to work really well as a team. You have to be extremely resilient. You have to be a player manager. You have to be quite a good generalist. Um, you know, those kind of traits have been the most important thing when it comes to hiring. I think as you scale, um, you then have the luxury of being able to hire specialists and hire people, who have different sets of skills. But I would say my approach has typically been to find the person first because I think you can't change someone's kind of basic personality and basic character traits. And if you have the right personality and the right character traits for the role that you're hiring for, I think you can teach everything else, but with the big caveat that it's a huge advantage to have the experience. And if you don't have the experience, you need to be very, very willing to learn it quickly.
I couldn't agree with everything you said there more. I think the mindset dominates everything. We're going to come on to that in a second. But yeah, I see maybe more on the sales side, different methodologies. have kind of superseded domain expertise. So we're seeing on the sales side, some customers would prefer to hire someone with a medic background, irrespective of where they've applied that sales methodology to different levels of success. I think as well, and it's another question for in a second, but I think given the proliferation of MarTech, you can spend a load of money on marketing and MarTech, right? And you can have all the gear, and sometimes that gives the facade of being able to actually deliver ROI. But so I think that it's just interesting that the domain side is fundamental. But again, there's lots of people that have the domain expertise, but they don't have the mindset to actually go and execute. And so,
Yeah.
you do need both. And
Yeah.
coming on to that, actually thinking about the mindset for success, and we touched on it, throughout this podcast. But you know, I suppose it's kind of a fundamental question, like what drives you to be successful? Are you sort of, is the fear of failure driving you, or is it the fear of the joy of winning, or like what's, because obviously two young children, big roles in big businesses of different sizes, there's a load going on. It's there's not enough hours in a day. Like from a mindset perspective, Rebekah, like what drives you? What's making you successful?
All of the above, probably. I think I'm one of four kids, and I've always had to work really hard to get my voice heard. And I think from a very, very young age, I have just had a really, really strong work ethic. I think I inherited that from my parents. And I mean, my mum used to despair of me as a teenager because she would be telling me to go to bed and stop doing my homework. I was not the child who was told that I needed to, crack on and double down when I was revising for my exams. So I think I innately have a really strong work ethic. I feel like the world doesn't owe me a living, like I owe the world something, and I want to do something where, at the end of my career, I feel like I've worked really hard and I've contributed to something that is meaningful and that is not just kind of earning me money. I'm definitely not money motivated. I'm not doing this for the money. I'm doing it for the kind of joy and the desire to want to make a difference and to do something useful and meaningful. I think that probably is my personality. I do really enjoy the successes of the company when they happen. Like I really enjoy those kind of big career highs. And I think I'm probably quite resilient in the career lows. I go and shout and swear at a few people, and then I go and get on my bike and pedal it out, and then I go and take the dog for a walk and kind of reflect on my behavior, and then I get up the next day and go again. So I think I am quite a resilient person. Um, but yeah, I think it probably does come down to personality type, and I probably am one of those people who is quite resilient and quite who's got quite a strong work ethic.
I didn't know you were one of four kids. Where do you sit in the stack? Where like have you got older brothers and
Number
sisters?
two,
Number
number
two.
two, yeah,
See, not the oldest, not the baby.
yeah,
You've got to. There's a lot going on there.
yeah,
Finn's
yeah.
Finn's one of five, and he's the middle boy, and so he's just,
That's very
he's
complicated. See, I did
exactly.
have the luxury of being the oldest girl, and so I used to use that. Well, I'm the oldest girl, so that's how I kind of created meaning in my position.
It's interesting, it was interesting as well. Your mum, not having to tell you to stop studying. I hope that's a problem I encounter with my kids. I don't think it'll be the case, but the yeah, it's interesting that resilience piece. I've read psychology psychology fascinates me, and reading and learning about how we do things is endlessly fascinating to me. But that resilience piece, that grit, that determination, I think it's in us all. But for whatever reason, life just means that for some of us it comes to the front, and some of us it doesn't. But it's such an important quality. I think just having that in the locker is invaluable. It's one of the things that you can't trade. You have to have it. Which leads me on to the point about tough times, because you mentioned at the top of the podcast highs and lows of everything, and the last 5 years have been so chaotic. COVID, the kind of the yeah, and everything that flowed from that. Like, how do you handle difficult times? Like, how do you manage the downs as well as the ups?
I think you have to find your thing, don't you? You find your thing. You find the place and the space where you have an outlet that kind of rebuilds you. And for me, it's people and people connections. So my family and friends are very, very important. I'm a natural extrovert. I get my energy from people. I recharge my batteries by being around people. So, that's the first thing. And the second thing is exercise for me. So in various different forms, either cardio. So I've been a runner in the past. I do that less now. Biking, and also just being out in nature. So my one non-negotiable every day is that I walk for an hour every single day with my dog, and
Amazing.
I build it into my work day because I make my best decisions when I'm out walking the dog on my own, and all those really challenging things that are going around in my head that I don't know how to solve when I'm sitting at my desk. I magically seem to find better answers when I'm outside walking in nature. And so I think you have to find your thing and just be really strict with yourself that I am not going to give that up. So, for a while, there were times where I felt guilty about going for a walk for an hour because I had so much to do, until I reflected that actually, if I didn't do that, my work suffered as a result. And so now I encourage my team to do meetings while they're walking. If you want to take the meeting while you're out walking, I will be more than happy with you doing that. Like, don't ever feel like you have to be sat in front of your computer with your camera on. Like, just tell me I'm going to do this meeting while walking, and then 100% I'm there backing you up. So I think it's really important to find your thing and to be really selfish about ring fencing that thing and kind of not giving it up.
Again, that is there is a direct. I don't know the best ideas I've ever had have come out walking. Just moving. It's like meditation. It's like your
Yeah.
mind clears and the ideas they sometimes come fully formed. Like, I couldn't agree with that more. It's a blessing to be able to do that. Just to get out there and it really does matter. I think it's so important. Moving really does help manage the ups and the downs. Um, Thinking about right now in 2025, in forward, moving into 2026, what's what are your thoughts on the trends in the Ford market currently? Like, how are you seeing it? We'll come on to AI in a second, but specifically within Ford, and it could be AI within Ford, of course, because we're seeing that loads, right? But like, yeah, what's your thoughts on the current market?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, you can't separate AI from fraud now. So I think the trends that we're very much seeing going into 2026 are around AI fraud and how AI is facilitating the kind of speed, scale, complexity, and execution of fraud
Yeah,
attacks.
yeah,
Um, and also, then the flip side of that is agentic commerce and how we're going to be using AI to facilitate a different commercial model and a different way of interacting with merchants and online sites using authorized agents. And I think that presents a huge, interesting challenge for companies like Darwinium around how you separate, human agent and bot behavior, and
yeah.
which of those kind of combinations are trusted and nefarious. And it's one of the things I'm actually most excited about in 2026 for Darwinium is, we've grown up in the age of AI. Our whole platform is AI native. It's built with agents and the best machine learning and the best AI capabilities already because we're only 4.5 years old.
Yeah.
And so we're so uniquely placed to be able to identify, categorize, separate, agent behavior from human behavior. And I think that's really exciting going into 2026, because as much as I think we're terrified by the potential for AI fraud, I think also the potential for AI fraud prevention is huge. And, I'm excited to see how the market changes in the next year.
Yeah, I think yeah, the agentic commerce piece is kind of, it's yeah, when you start to really think about it, it's, as I said, we're in this moment where we're kind of living history right now. It's, not to sound dramatic, which I am often, but it's fundamental. There's a massive change coming up, and like you, I'm an optimist and very much focused on the opportunities. But
Mm.
there's some real challenges with that as well.
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
it's significant, right? It's a massive change, and actually thinking about AI, but in marketing, as I said, an explosion of sales tech and martech and AI on top of that as well. Like, how are you managing that? That must be significant as well.
It's huge, and it's the thing that I think about most at the moment, to be honest, is you know separating what I want to do with AI versus what I really don't want to do with AI. I think it's an incredible tool for marketers around things like, tailoring messages, around executing things quicker, around, scaling messages across industries and across use cases, around kind of the way that you automate and personalize messages. I think it's incredible. I think what I don't want to happen, and I don't ever want this to happen within, for me personally, but also within my team, is that it becomes a replacement for creative and critical thinking,
Yeah.
or a way to kind of be lazy about the way that you think about things. Because I think it's so obvious to me when I read something that has been AI generated without any kind of creative or critical thinking. And I think we have to be absolutely diligent with ourselves that we have to do the thinking first and the creative thinking first before we then use an AI tool to either enhance or edit or refine. And so, what I'm trying to do with the way that I use AI is to always make sure that I've got my draft, I've got my point of view, I've got my perspective, I've got what I'm trying to create, and I use AI as my kind of co-pilot to refine, give me different options, execute, speed up, edit, um, but not to ever replace the thinking. And I actually hate a lot of things that I read that I know are AI generated, and I almost like rebel with certain things, like my LinkedIn posts and that kind of thing. I'm like, I want you to see the error in this copy, to understand that it's me, and to understand that it's heartfelt and it's coming from me,
Yeah.
and that I'm not just putting it into into an LLM to create for me. So I think that is really critical, and I'm very passionate about making sure that we're using AI for good and we're not using it to replace critical thinking or creativity.
Yeah, yeah, and you can see how that, there's a danger of that for sure. Um, and yeah, I think when you're essentially outsourcing to ChatGPT, ideas, that's a very, very slippery slope. So I'm with you for sure. It's interesting you mentioned about LinkedIn. We from a social marketing perspective, we use LinkedIn extensively. It's a great tool for us. But people have different views on it, and like you, looking at some of the LinkedIn posts, you can tell that they're AI generated, and I think that's kind of pretty harmful. That's not. I don't think that's a benefit. But in terms of like social marketing and individual brands, I'm seeing that becoming much more important, much more prominent. Like, would you agree with that? Like, is that sort of, are you aligned on that? Do you think that's the case?
Yeah, I still love LinkedIn, and I think it's about finding your tribe and finding the people who agree with you. I think there is enough critical mass on LinkedIn of people who are like-minded and think like we do, that it's a worthwhile platform to be on, engage with, find your network, and kind of learn from. I still read something on LinkedIn every day that I didn't know and that I've learned from. Um, Obviously, there are people doing poor jobs selling things in a really kind of horrible way. There are AI generated pieces of content. There are, points of view which are probably not best placed to be sitting on LinkedIn, and maybe should be on a different social media platform. But I think you are going to get that with any kind of social network now. And I think LinkedIn does a reasonable job with the algorithm of kind of showing you more of the things that you interact with. And so I just try to be fairly kind of one dimensional in only interacting with the things that I value and the thought leadership. And I also try to only post things that I feel are of value to other people. And when I'm using the Darwinium account and I'm using LinkedIn for kind of marketing purposes, I'm very much thinking about my audience and thinking about what is interesting to them and what is a useful point of view and a thought leadership kind of mindset, as opposed to, you know, reverting to any of the sort of lazy selling. So that's what I'm trying to do, and I'm trying to be critical of myself and my team when we're doing that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think, but it is a discipline. It is, and it's exactly that. Putting out content on LinkedIn, and I'm thinking to myself, like, how's it going to be received? What am I trying to say here, as opposed to keeping, a certain number of posts up per week. So that's, yeah, super interesting. And final few questions that I had for you, both about your successes, like proudest achievements, but also about people moving into marketing. But I know you're nowhere near the end of your career, right? But up until this point, what's been the most proudest achievement? Like, what's the thing where you look back on and you say, like, that was an amazing time, and I contributed to that.
Yeah, I think I already touched on kind of like growing teams, and I get a huge amount of personal satisfaction when something happens with either your previous team member or someone you've mentored. So actually, one of my happiest moments in the last 6 or 7 years was the first person I mentored at LexisNexis. She was brilliant, and I didn't feel qualified to mentor her at all. And I really learned from just chatting to her and realized that a mentor mentee relationship is not about having all of the answers, but it's actually just about being a sounding board. And sometimes you might be a slightly more experienced sounding board than the person that you're talking to. Anyway, there was one particular thing that that person wanted to do, and she wanted to move to Singapore and work in Singapore. And when I first started chatting with her, she didn't know how to do it, didn't have the confidence to even start to have the conversation with her manager. And we worked together, for a couple of months. And anyway, she's been living in Singapore for the last 5 years, like absolutely rocking it and being an incredible success. And every time I see her on LinkedIn or in person, I just feel so happy for her. And I know I only played a tiny part in that. I didn't make that happen. She made it happen. But I hope that through the conversations that we had together, she worked out her path to being able to do that. So that was, yeah, that was a huge career high for me. And I suppose from a personal perspective, I feel very proud of where we've got Darwinium to. Like, doing naught to something at a company is the hardest thing I've ever had to do in my career. Like,
Sure.
coming in with no customers and a very nascent product and taking it to where we've got it now. I mean, I am only a cog in the larger Darwinium wheel, and we've done it as a team, very much as a team. But I feel a huge sense of achievement of getting to where we are now as an established company with lots of really successful customers. So that's good.
The colleague that you helped move to Singapore, I'm sure you played a big part in that, and that's fundamental to her. And these are big moves, and with regards to Darwinium, yeah, absolutely fantastic business, and it's amazing to see the growth of that business over the years, and yourself and your colleagues, obviously a team effort, but yeah, I can imagine why you'd be proud of that, and with much more success to come, by the way. So, Rebekah, thinking about people thinking about moving into marketing, so advice for aspiring marketeers, like what would you say? Like, what are I mean, outside of resilience and the things that we've spoken about, like the fundamentals that we all had to have, whether we're in sales or marketing or any other business unit, like for a young marketeer or someone breaking in, like what would your advice be to those people right now?
I think unequivocally you need to learn your AI tools and you need to have a view on how you would use AI. I can't imagine anyone going into marketing now wouldn't be asked that question.
Yeah.
So I think because AI has so changed the way that we can kind of create communication en masse, I think having a really strong opinion on how you would use it, why you would use it in that way, and what you wouldn't use it for would be really important. And then, yeah, the other thing I would think about is just in terms of qualities of what you need to succeed. Um, it is a creative industry, but it's also you need to be quite scientific, be quite analytical. So, to your point earlier about looking at results driven metrics and how you plan your budget for next year based on results, and having that kind of analytical mindset of um, looking at all of the activity that you're doing and understanding how it's performing and how that's going to impact, how you change and grow for your next year is really important.
That's absolutely fantastic advice. I think sometimes, given the pace of change, it's kind of difficult to, the things are changing so rapidly that it's, on the specifics. But yeah, having the mindset of thinking about how it's all going to fall into play and having an opinion on it and how it's going to piece together, I think is super interesting. And look, I have hugely enjoyed this conversation. It's been absolutely
As have
wonderful. I've
I.
learned loads. It's been brilliant. I just hugely appreciate you sharing all of this. It's been great, and I know that many people listening to this will learn so much from it as I have. So, just wanted to say, thank you so much again for taking the time. Wishing you, your family, Darwinium, and everyone, the success in the coming months. And yeah, just thanks so much for doing this.
Thanks, James. No, I've really enjoyed it as well. So thank you very much for having me.
My pleasure. See you soon.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks so much. Bye bye.